He was exhausted, freezing, and desperate for a break from a brutal tour. So Buddy Holly took a small plane through a winter storm, a split-second decision that would cost the rock and roll pioneer his life. A rock and roll legend gone too soon. On February 3rd, 1959, the world awoke to shocking news. 22-year-old Buddy Holly, one of rock and roll's brightest stars, had been killed in a plane crash. It was the tragedy that Don McLean would later call the day the music died. In his short career, Buddy Holly had already become a central figure in rock and roll's early days. He wrote and recorded groundbreaking songs and even helped define the classic rock band lineup of 2 guitars, bass, and drums. His influence spread far and wide. Artists from Bob Dylan to the Beatles all idolized him. Fans couldn't believe that such a talented, hard-working young musician was suddenly gone. How did this devastating fate come about? What were Buddy Holly's final days really like? Life leading up to the tragedy. By late 1958, Buddy Holly's career was at a crossroads. He had recently parted ways with his band, the Crickets, and their manager, Norman Petty, amid disputes over royalties. Buddy was newly married and needed money. Petty had been withholding his earnings, and Buddy's wife, Maria Elena, was pregnant with their first child. Determined to support his growing family and fund a planned move to New York, Buddy agreed to join an ambitious winter tour across the Midwest. He also had his eye on future opportunities. He'd signed with a new agency in hopes of joining an upcoming British tour. At just 22, Buddy was juggling the pressures of finance, a new marriage, and career moves. Yet he remained driven by his passion for music and a sense that bigger things were ahead. Little did he know that this hectic chapter would be his last. The Winter Dance Party Tour from Hell. Buddy Holly hit the road in January 1959 as the headliner of the Winter Dance Party Tour, backed by a makeshift band, including young Waylon Jennings on bass and Tommy Alsop on guitar. The tour's schedule was grueling, 24 shows in 24 days all across the frozen Midwest. The musicians crisscrossed hundreds of miles between gigs each night, packed onto a drafty repurposed school bus. The bus lacked heating, and temperatures outside plunged to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and even 40 below zero in some places. In those frigid early morning hours, Buddy and his tour mates often found themselves huddled under coats for warmth. At one point, even burning newspapers on the bus to stave off frostbite when the engine died in the Wisconsin wilderness. It was so cold that the tour's drummer, Carl Bunch, literally froze his feet. He developed severe frostbite and had to be hospitalized. Buddy, Ritchie Valens, and even the opening act Dion DiMucci had to take turns manning the drums on stage because their drummer was out of commission. Travel logistics were a nightmare. The tour itinerary zigzagged irrationally across states. One promoter called it the tour from hell. There were no off days at all, so the exhausted musicians spent nearly every daytime on the road. They endured long 12-hour drives on icy 2-lane highways, with frequent bus breakdowns and swaps. 5 different buses in 11 days. Buddy was a Texas boy not used to Midwestern blizzards, and the miserable conditions wore him down. By the time the tour pulled into Clear Lake, Iowa, on February 2nd, Buddy had reached a breaking point. He hadn't been eating or sleeping well, and his spirits were low. He and others were coming down with the flu, and everyone's nerves were frayed. That night, Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake was packed with dancing teens eager to see the rock and roll stars. Buddy gave an electrifying performance, smiling on stage despite the fatigue. But backstage, he voiced frustration about the abysmal travel conditions and joked grimly that he'd do anything to avoid another freezing overnight bus ride. The fateful flight into darkness. After the Clear Lake concert ended around midnight, Buddy Holly made a fateful decision. "I'm flying out," he told his bandmates. He was going to charter a plane for himself and a couple of others to reach the next tour stop ahead of the bus. The next show was set for the very next evening in Moorhead, Minnesota, over 350 miles away, and Buddy longed for a decent night's sleep and even a chance to do laundry before that show. A 21-year-old local pilot, Roger Peterson, was hired to fly a small Beechcraft Bonanza out of Mason City, Iowa. Originally, Buddy's bassist Waylon Jennings was supposed to go on the plane, but Waylon gave up his seat to JP, the Big Bopper Richardson, who was suffering from the flu. Guitarist Tommy Allsup flipped a coin with 17-year-old Ritchie Valens for the last seat. Valens won the coin toss, quipping that it was the first thing he'd ever won in his life. In a bittersweet twist of fate, the musicians who climbed into that plane with Buddy were the ones desperate to avoid another miserable bus ride. Shortly after 12:55 a.m. on February 3rd, 1959, Buddy Holly's chartered plane roared down the runway into the snowy darkness. Light snow was falling as they took off, and a blustery winter storm was moving in. The pilot, Peterson, was young and not fully certified for instrument-only flying. He had not been warned that bad weather was ahead. Within minutes of takeoff, the tiny plane was caught in high winds and blinding snow. Peterson likely became disoriented in the dark sky. The aircraft started losing altitude. Tragically, nobody realized the danger until it was too late. Around 1 a.m., just 5 miles from the airport, the plane's right wing tip clipped the frozen ground. The plane cartwheeled violently into a cornfield outside Clear Lake, breaking apart on impact. The wreckage wasn't found until hours later that morning, when a search party saw the crumpled metal strewn across the snow. Inside that twisted heap were the bodies of Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, and the young pilot. There were no survivors. Last words and heartbreaking details. Back at the surf ballroom, just before leaving, Buddy had made one last phone call to his pregnant wife, Maria Elena, to let her know he was okay and on his way. That would be the final time she ever spoke to him. In the moments before boarding the plane, Buddy and Waylon Jennings exchanged a light-hearted jab that now feels chilling in hindsight. Buddy teased Waylon for chickening out of the flight, quipping, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up." Waylon laughed and shot back, "Yeah, and I hope your old plane crashes." It was just a joke between friends, but those words haunted Waylon for the rest of his life. In the aftermath of the crash, when the tour bus finally arrived at the next town, the remaining musicians learned the awful truth from their manager. Their friends had perished in the night. Buddy's brother Larry had the grim duty of traveling to Iowa to identify the body of his 22-year-old sibling. The shockwaves were immediate and profound. Buddy's young widow Maria Elena was watching TV in New York when she saw a news bulletin about the crash. She was so overwhelmed that she miscarried their unborn child the very next day. She was too grief-stricken to even attend Buddy's funeral, and in fact, she has never visited his gravesite to this day. Investigation and aftermath. The Civil Aeronautics Board launched an investigation into the crash and concluded that it was a tragic cocktail of bad weather and human error. Pilot Peterson was not qualified to fly solely by instruments and had made the unwise decision to take off into a dark winter storm he couldn't navigate. In other words, the poor guy likely got lost in the clouds and never realized the plane was descending until it was too late. There was no indication of foul play. Decades later, a rumor that an accidental gunshot might have caused the crash was thoroughly debunked by forensic experts. All 3 stars on board died instantly of massive trauma, as did the pilot. One small but meaningful change did come from the disaster. Authorities implemented a new policy not to publicly announce victims' names until families are notified first. After seeing the anguish Maria Elena Holly went through hearing about Buddy's death on the news. Even amid the investigations, the show tried to go on. The devastated tour members carried on with new artists filling in for the lost headliners. But nothing could fill the void left in the rock and roll world. Buddy's close friends and family struggled with guilt and grief. His bandmates from the Crickets were shattered to lose the friend they had hoped to reunite with later that year. Waylon Jennings, for his part, had escaped death that night, but he carried the weight of that bad joke last goodbye in his heart for decades. Public reaction and lasting legacy. News of Buddy Holly's death hit the airwaves and newspapers worldwide. Fans were in disbelief. How could 3 young rock and roll talents be here one night and gone by morning? While the initial headlines eventually faded, the impact of that loss only grew with time. In the 1970s, Don McLean's hit song, American Pie, famously immortalized February 3, 1959, as "the day the music died," bringing the tragedy back into the public consciousness. Buddy Holly's story also reached new generations through movies like The Buddy Holly Story, 1978, and Ritchie Valens' biopic, La Bamba, 1987. each ending with that fateful winter night. Over the years, Buddy's legacy only shines brighter. He was among the very first inductees to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986. Rolling Stone ranks him one of the greatest artists of all time. His music influenced countless legends who followed, from the Beatles to Elton John, many of whom cite Buddy's innovative songwriting and hiccuping vocal style as inspirations. Every year, fans gather at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake for memorial concerts celebrating the music of Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. At the crash site, a simple memorial with Buddy's signature black-rimmed glasses marks the spot in the cornfield where their journey ended. It's a somber reminder of how fleeting life can be. Buddy Holly was a rising star who blazed across the sky of rock and roll, only to be tragically cut off in mid-flight. His final days were filled with youthful ambition, harsh realities, and decisions made in the spur of the moment. In the end, Buddy's story stands as both an inspiring tale of innovation and a heartbreaking cautionary tale about the price of fame and fortune.